China's GDP is almost 6 times that of India, but China will soon be left behind in at least one area next year. The United Nations estimates India will surpass China as the world's most populous country next year. According to the World Body's report, India's population stands at 1.412 billion in 2022 compared to China's 1.426 billion. By 2050, India is projected to have a population of over 1.668 billion, way ahead of China's 1.3 billion people by the middle of the century. The World Population Prospects report also estimates that the global population will reach 8 billion on November 15th this year. Interestingly, the global population is growing at the slowest rate since 1950. Now, the question here is this a bad thing or a good thing for India? For the longest time, a big question mark and problem area in our policy making has been the large population. How do you plan for such a large population? How do you reduce poverty levels when you have such a large population? But on the other hand, the population rate of India has also been pitched as a demographic dividend. What really is the case? To speak more on this, I'm joined today by Madan Sabnavis, Chief Economist at Bank of Baroda, and Anubhuti Sahay, Head of Economic Research, South Asia at Standard Chartered Bank. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us today on the India Development Debate. Madan, let me just begin with your take on this. And of course, the numbers are as they are. It was expected at the rate at which India is growing. Plus, China had put into place a one-child policy which is beginning to kick in. But as far as India is concerned, isn't the fact that our population is actually now growing at a lower rate than ever before?
See, it's one thing to talk about the rate of growth. The second is the absolute mass of population, which is very large. And the fact that we're going to be the largest country in terms of population is slightly disturbing for me, because if you look at a large population, the natural question to ask is that, are we making enough provisions for them right from the time when the child is born? So in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of social security, and most importantly, I think employment. So we are already talking in terms of how jobs are not being created at an adequate pace. And as the population builds up, in order to sustain the economy, sustain the population growth, and make sure that everybody meets the minimum threshold of income, that will be the biggest challenge for the government. So that's how I look at it.
Anubhuti Sahay, I want to just look at Elon Musk's point of view, and it's out there, but he has been speaking time and again about how the greatest existential threat that faces humanity is a dwindling population. He often jokes about how he's single-handedly contributing to fixing this issue with more and more offspring. Do you think there's any merit to Elon's theory that as the human race on a whole, a lower population is not what we need?
Well, look, demography always has advantages, and population growth always adds to overall economic growth, and this adds to the global economy. So, what Madan has pointed out is very right, but at the same time, I think the positives also need to be, kept in mind. If India turns out to be a 1.4 billion size population today, and 1.6 billion eventually, it clearly has certain advantages, especially when the global population is expected to decline, or it's expected to reduce, especially when you look at the European side, US, as well as the Chinese economy. Look at the world today. There is an increased trend towards deglobalization or protectionism. Larger population clearly gives you an edge, as domestic orientation remains pretty strong. It is estimated that almost 25% of the global workforce by 2040 would come from India. That provides an income earning opportunity for India and puts India right on the global map. And last but not least, I think the size always makes a lot of difference. There are a lot of young countries. If you look at the median age, India is the median age for India is expected to be 28. Probably the comparable countries would be Indonesia or sub-Saharan economies. But the size which India offers, just because of the sheer number of people or headcount which it has, it clearly offers a large scale to the world at large. So there is a merit for sure of having a larger population, or a decent rate of increase in population. And to that extent, India has the advantage. But I think the broader point which Madan is making is also important. Unless we really nurture those bodies and minds for the overall well-being of the global population as well as global economic growth, probably then the merit might not look that great.
Madan, I want you to address that point. And we know at the family level, at the individual level, and as a nation, a large population has always been cited as reasons for roadblocks in our progress. Our average consumption, our average purchasing parity, everything comes down when you take that massive denominator of our population. But in the big picture, where developed nations around the world are suffering from an aging population, do you think this needs a more nuanced approach?
If you're looking at India, for example, I think there is a lot of inequality. And when we are talking of a larger population, we tend to have larger families at the low income levels. So that's why I think it may not be a big advantage. Now, when you give the example of Musk saying that we do require more people, that definitely holds in the Western economies. And one of the reasons why we have seen a lot of migration taking place from the developing countries to the developed countries is precisely to fill in for this particular labor force. But this has also created certain issues which you have seen in US, when I think Donald Trump was the president, where they said making America great, and therefore there was some focus on making sure that immigrants were not permitted. So this kind of conflicts will probably remain. So I think having a large population, what Anubhuti said is perfectly right. It provides a lot of demand, lots of purchasing power. But I think unless we are able to create jobs, we're able to make sure there's more equitable distribution of income, I think this can become a major burden for us. And we have seen that even the demographic dividend which we talk of could be a kind of a demographic disaster for India, because we don't want to have more Swiggy and Zomato delivery boys. That is not the employment. We need to have an educated class of people. And this is something which I think there's a lot of education inequality in India, which ensures that the status quo is maintained.
So, Anubhuti, your point on this, on giving good quality jobs, a good quality of life. The fact is that our large population has also fueled the massive increase in the strength of India's service economy. But on an individual level, are we falling behind on the kind of quality that we need to provide?
Absolutely, I think that's pretty evident if you look at the Human Development Index. Whether you talk about education, probably at primary school level, the education level and retention rates are higher. But as we move towards higher education, it clearly comes off. If you look at India's GDP, services sector is the biggest driver. And besides other problem, one of the most important reason which gets cited in the growth of the economy is lack of skilled labor. So having headcounts is one thing, but ensuring that the available headcount has the right amount of, a right level of skill and education to deliver and add to the productivity growth is a completely different thing. So I think, the quality matters a lot from the human resource perspective. And unless that is put in place, the quality of life, which a population would aspire, we are still a low, middle income economy. To move to a higher per capita level, a lot of reforms have to be initiated at regional level to ensure that there is more gender inclusiveness when it comes to the labor force participation rate. And there is a lot more requirement to go for technology advancement. So host of measures are required to ensure that there is, the human advantage which India has the right quality, and that will be essential if the right quality of life has to be given to the population at large.
Unfortunately, in India, the issue of population very quickly becomes a political one. And goes into details of where is the population higher, where is it not higher. It also leads to a divide between northern states of the country and southern states of the country, etc. But Madan, overall, do you think that this is something that shouldn't be subject to policy interference at all? Because we're seeing as education levels are improving, especially for females, you're already seeing a dwindling rate of population, isn't it?
That's true, but I think the way I look at it is that if you keep the politics aside, as I have a larger population, and if the population comes from the lower income families, the dependence on the government becomes higher. So just look at a situation when we had the lockdown and the government had to provide for, say, free food. It's a good thing to say that when we hear the government saying that 500, 600, 700 million people have provided free rations. Now, that's a good thing. But the fact is, I should not be having so many people who actually require this kind of support from the government. So as the population keeps growing, if they're going to fall in this particular income group, which remains totally dependent on the government in times of crisis, I don't think that's a very good sign. So I would not really get into the northern, southern, or any of that kind of division. But definitely having more people who are being dependent on the government is not a good sign for the country.
But, to be fair, as you have an older population, which is not able to work and is living longer, they will also be dependent on the government more and more. Isn't that also a concern, Anubhuti?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, high dependency ratio is always a burden on the working population. But probably that's something which we need to worry about at a later stage. I think the bigger worry at this particular point in time is to generate enough jobs so as to go and reap the benefits of the larger population. Of course, the stage at where we are today, it's impossible to reach the perfect or equilibrium level, but more measures to create more jobs are required. And I think one point which I would like to highlight is about the female labor force participation rate.
Yes.
If you look at India's labor force participation rate, it's just at 47% if you go by PLFS survey. But if you look at the female labor force participation rate, it's just 20%. And if you look at the delta of the population increase, which is coming as we speak, and which is expected to come over the next few years, bulk of it is expected to come from the female labor force. Hence, measures are required. I think policy measures are required to create a conducive environment to increase female labor force participation rate, especially if this whole talk about demographic dividend has to translate into a reality.
Absolutely. This will also maybe give more choice for women to have children. This will also, in a larger sense, maybe take care of any concerns with the population explosion. Thank you so much, Madan Sabnavis and Anubhuti Sahay, for joining us today.